Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. People are still being admitted.
I see a lot of familiar faces from yesterday. Wow.
Maybe we should get an indication of who was not here yesterday. It would help us to know.
That could be very helpful, yes.
Oh, yeah, how about this? While people are coming in, raise your hand if you did not attend yesterday. If you did not attend yesterday.
Hmm.
4, 6, 8, 10,
15
20.
so far.
15, yeah.
Okay, good to know. So a lot of folks were on yesterday. That's what we're learning.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna lower all hands. We just wanted to get a sense. Okay, so it looks like most people are joined now, Andy, if you want to go ahead and start.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for you all who are repeats from yesterday. We appreciate all your time. So a lot of this is going to be repetitive, but for the benefit of those who were not here yesterday, we're going to go through some of the same stuff at the beginning of our meeting. So I just wanted to cover real quickly kind of where we landed the plane about 2 weeks ago. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a couple of meetings and we got towards the end of our meetings and we realized we were in a little bit of we were just kind of stuck. We weren't really making any progress towards consensus on certain items. And it became clear to us that we needed to do something a little bit different. So the 4 co-chairs got together and we thought this through and we decided to create the survey. You all got the survey. Thank you for participating and answering the questions so that we could just kind of get the temperature in the room, I guess you would say, of where people are at on certain issues. And so we kind of chose to separate out this idea of cutting trees and this idea of removing the product from the forest. Those we felt like separating those two things would help get at where people stood on these issues and how we could then move forward in the conversation. So that was kind of how the survey was born. There was nothing more to it than that. It wasn't exhaustive. It only had 4 options, including abstain. So it doesn't pinpoint every single person exactly where you land, but at least it gave us a feel for where the group is, so that we can start to kind of think through what it would look like to build consensus around certain items. So that's it. So with that, Eileen, I think, is going to talk about the results of the survey, so that you can kind of see from our viewpoint what we saw.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. So as we said, we wanted to get a better handle on where people were, because we were hearing a lot of things, and frankly, I and others were relatively new to this issue in the state of New Jersey, and I wasn't sure where people landed, and neither were my co-chairs. So we thought this one thing that we noticed was that, is this really about cutting trees? Is it about removing wood products? Let's separate these two things, because they might be separate issues. So what we found with the first question on cutting trees, we're seeing a pretty big majority of respondents agreeing with the option, and I'll read it to you in case you've forgotten. The option was: cutting trees is an activity or tool that can only be used as part of an approved plan, so long as the objective pertains to the overall ecological health, current and future, of that particular forest. Now, there's some definitions that need to be made in there, like if we were to parse this out a little bit more. But it was interesting to see that really a big majority of the respondents could live with that, or they selected that option. However, there were significant numbers of people, although they were minority votes, that were in the cutting trees is an activity or tool that can be used as part of an approved plan for a variety of objectives, including the generation of revenue. That what came in next. And then what came in next was cutting trees should never be permitted. We did have like 2 individuals who abstained from this particular, and apologies for not having the abstentions yesterday. We made the pie charts up quickly and just didn't have the numbers for the abstentions. So they're included here today for those of you who made a point of pointing that out. So this was kind of interesting to see that there's room here. As you know, we're trying to get people to come together to see with further definition, with further discussion, can we bring some of the folks that were in the minority respondents into this majority, which is, part of an approved plan for ecological health? If those were further defined, could people live with that? So that was the cutting trees. The other one was wood products. Why does it have that thing there? Okay. This was different. And, this was interesting because we are seeing a little bit of a difference. Again, the majority of folks here, not as large as the majority before, that went for that middle of the road option. And I'll read it to you. The removal of wood products is an activity or a tool that can only be used as part of an approved plan, so long as the objective pertains to the overall ecological health, current and future, of that particular forest. So that was this orange. But look at this. This blue came in next, significant number of people. The removal of wood products should never be permitted. So that was very interesting. And then next came the removal of wood products, an activity that can be used as part of an approved plan for a variety of objectives, including generation of revenue. And again, that 1 or 2 or 3 abstentions. So what we're concluding from this is that in some instances, people are okay with thinning or cutting of trees for certain specific ecological purposes, but not with the selling of that wood for DEP. And perhaps, and perhaps leaving the wood on site. So just knowing that differentiation with people's responses was very informative for us and very helpful. And that it helps us to guide some questions towards consensus. We wanted to learn more from you about this issue of leaving wood products versus removing wood products. And if you do remove wood products, what to do with them? Do you leave them somewhere else? Do you destroy them? Or do you sell them? So I think that's a little bit of the crux of our issues regarding consensus. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and then we'll move to the next part of the meeting today, which is...
I'm next.
Is that you, Anjali?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. To those of you that were present yesterday. Can you all hear me? Yes. Yeah. So thank you, Eileen, for discussing those results. As you saw, there's a clear result for the first question from the survey, which is, specific about cutting of trees. But then the second question is really not that obvious. So because of that, meaning as a majority, what do we prefer? So to elaborate on the discussion, to hear from everybody's perspective, and to further understand, what would be good reasons as to why you would need to remove wood products from the forest, or why shouldn't you? We invited 6 different speakers yesterday from this task force to express their different points of view for that argument. And we heard from Emil DeVito, Sarah Webb, Leslie Sauer, Bob Williams, Kristen Maestrel, and Matt Olson. They essentially took like a bit of over 5 minutes to, explain their perspective. So that then after that, we went into clarifying questions and just essentially a discussion about cutting trees and removal of wood products in general. We have the recording from yesterday's meeting. So we wanted to ask everybody if it would be in your interest, if you would like to rewatch. I know there's a lot of people that were present in yesterday's meeting. So Eileen is going to sort of give you the option of do a poll with the question, would you like to rewatch these presentations from the 6 different speakers from yesterday? Or would you rather skip that and just use this time for more discussion, for more clarifying questions? And I know there's about 15 or maybe more people that weren't present yesterday. The recording is already available, so you can always go and watch that. It's in the G Drive for the climate work group. So it's really up to you if you want us to play this. We're ready to play it if it's necessary. But I think, I think we forgot to mention this at the beginning of this meeting, but we've dedicated a lot of time to this issue. And we've decided that this is the last meeting that we're going to dedicate specific to this discussion, because we need to get to other issues, right? So we think that it's in our best interest to, reach consensus and to get to the questions. So I think the poll, thank you, Eileen, for putting that out there. People keep answering, so I'm just gonna wait for people to stop voting. Or this is not a vote, selecting an answer. Okay, so I think, oh no, still moving. It's about 80% of people that are telling us to not replay this. So if my co-chairs are comfortable with not replaying, I think we can move ahead into clarifying questions and more discussion. Tom, I see you muting yourself.
Yeah, I know it's hard for the people that missed that yesterday, and we apologize for that. And you are going to be able to watch those videos after this meeting, but I think just we only have so much time, and we've got a lot to talk about and figure out. So I feel like probably it is in the best interest of everyone that we skip that and move into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it is in the shared directory, right, Angela?
Yes.
Right
Yes.
now, if you were to go into the shared documents, actually, I'm going to stick the link. I'll put the link. I'll
Yeah.
send it to folks.
It is about it's about half an hour. So just so people know, that part of the reason is, it would take half an hour to replay all of those talks from yesterday. So
I think it's more in the 45 minutes.
okay.
Half an hour, Tom. So
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, it's a huge chunk of time.
Oh, Angela, one question. Is it in the YouTube channel or just
No,
as a
in the climate work group
file? Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Just wanted to clarify.
folder.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so about 80% of people said, please don't replay this. So given that, Eileen, you took note of actually the people that were on queue to ask questions yesterday.
Yeah,
Maybe we can start with that. I'm hoping that everybody can remember their questions from yesterday.
oh, yeah. Those.
Julia's
okay,
like, yeah, I'm ready.
Well, some people emailed them to us, but we also had the order. So, actually, Andy, what did I do with my list? Oh, I have it written down. Andy was first and Julia Summers. What we can do, one of the things we talked about was interspersing questions from yesterday with questions for today. So that would, yeah,
Right.
it was clarifying questions for the people who spoke yesterday. So
Right.
that's still allowed because we have the speakers here with us. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, you'll get the gist, I think. So if you do have a question, please do raise your hand and we'll go back and forth from the list from yesterday into today. I do see that, Frank, you have your hand up. Is that a question regarding, well, regarding the survey. I'm just going to unmute you real quick. Your hand was up there. If it was a question on the survey, we can answer that quick.
No, I actually realized early on in the process that if you put your hand up during the
Frank, we
debate,
cannot understand you. It sounds very
Oh, okay.
weird. Is it just me?
No, I can't
Yeah.
hear you, Frank.
It's muffled, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So I learned early on in the process.
Can't
that
hear
if
you. Really can't hear you. Can you either send it to us? You know, sometimes it's those ear things.
Yeah, the
I
ear.
actually have,
Oh, there you
I
go.
have those in.
We can
That's
hear
much
you.
better. We hear
Yeah,
Ah,
we can hear
see?
you now, Frank.
you
You
now.
knew exactly. Okay. So I'm Frank Vogel. I'm the guy from South Jersey that runs the sawmill. And I learned early
Oh.
on that if you raise your hand early, you might get a question. Okay. So you gave me the floor for a second. So I want you all to look and see what I'm doing right now. Okay. I'm running a sawmill right now with our thing. I'm listening, right? And this is all legally harvested wood under forestry management plans. This is a piece of Atlantic white cedar. Look at that thing, right? Okay. But I had a question for the panelists that I sent in earlier, and it was really about fire suppression for South Jersey. So if you want to just start with questions, and since I was lucky enough to raise my hand early, I'd
thought it
like
was-
to ask the panel a question.
Yeah, we did notice that. Thanks for pointing that out, Frank, that
Okay.
we were trying to
So
hear. from
could I
voice-
ask a question or
Yeah.
no?
Yeah, and then we'll move on. I just wanted to point out that we are going to try to look for names that haven't had an opportunity to speak in previous meetings, like this is the first
You
time
know,
I.
I've never had a chance to speak in
Yeah,
previous
so-
meetings, so
So yes, go ahead and ask your
Go for
question.
it,
that's
Frank.
me.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, you guys are great. Well, thanks a bunch. I just by dumb luck, I got called there. So, first of all, hello, everybody. Welcome to South Jersey. I'm from Wading River. I know I have about 3 or 4 minutes. So I actually also work at Batsto on 2 days a week. I am a professional student. That's what I do now that I'm retired from education. But I am the sawmill interpreter at Batsto. And I don't know if you remember, but earlier in the summer, there was a significant fire in Wharton Forest, not the second one, but the first one. And if you've ever been to Batsto, you know the lovely and absolutely amazing buildings that are there that really speak from the Richards era, from the colonial era, and of course Wharton. But I tend the sawmill. Well, the day of the fire, in fact, for almost 2 full days of the fire, they had pumper trucks sitting next to every single village house, spraying water all over the structures in a valiant attempt. And thankfully, nothing burnt down. They set backfires right at the lake, right at Batsto Lake. But that's how close it got to Batsto, that it was frightening. So I guess my question to the group is, at least the panel, fire suppression and management practices, because we are only a perfect weather condition away from eradicating most of South Jersey in a wildfire that we have never even experienced in anyone's lifetime. There is so much fuel on the ground of public land I'm talking about. I burn my property all the time. I do that all the time. I guess the second question I'm going to ask is also related to the little spiel that occurred yesterday. In fact, Bob Williams pointed it out, that we're not going to stop using wood. And probably 95% of my business comes from private landowners. And the other part comes from my parcels. But if we don't start harvesting some of this beautiful Atlantic white cedar, this was a victim of Sandy. This would be rotting right now. This beautiful log would be rotting right on Bass River down here. It came out of a private parcel that was legally harvested using a forestry management plan. So I guess 2 questions there. What are we going to do about not burning South Jersey down, like, Batsto and Wading River? And the second thing is, how are we going to responsibly harvest wood to make sure that we meet South Jersey's wood needs? Because I can tell you right now, most of the cedar harvested in South Jersey goes to Gates in South Carolina. So somebody needs to calculate for me the carbon output of those diesel trucks shipping our Atlantic white cedar from South Jersey, right up through Hamilton, right onto the turnpike, and all the way down to be shipped back up to Home Depot here to sell to us. So I want to thank everybody for listening to me. And I want to be very grateful to all the panelists. You guys put a lot of work and effort in what you did yesterday. Thanks so much. And hopefully you answered my question. All right, take care.
Was it directed to anyone in particular, to Bob or someone?
Well, Bob, Matt Olson's, and I mean, any of the panelists,
Okay.
pro Workon. I mean, whoever wants to talk, it's fine by me.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself now. Okay.
Thanks, Frank.
All right.
Bob, you can unmute yourself. I don't know if Matt, I don't see where Matt is. Oh,
He's
Matt,
there.
you're not on mute. Okay. And then
Okay.
Kristen, if you want to unmute yourself, you have the ability also.
Do we have any panelists that want to respond to that question?
Yeah, at this point, I was deferring to Bob initially, but I can certainly speak to that. But yeah, so, to address the first question in regards to like the big fires and what we could be doing active management wise, I guess the first thing is that, big fires are going to happen, right? So we just had that large fire, the Mocha River fire that burnt like 13,000 acres or so. That was burning in a pretty remote area. So, the potential for loss of life and property was fairly low, although, certainly the issue of Batstow Village, a definite big concern there. But of course, the state took very good action, I think, in that case to kind of protect those areas. And then there's other kind of anchor points where they could have fought the fire there. That fire actually burned through another fairly large fire called the Penn Swamp Fire, actually reburned that area that burned back in 2017. But I guess, I would take it more from the perspective of strategic management actions around vulnerable communities. To me, the protection of life, obviously supersedes protection of property. So in my mind, it goes like protection of life, protection of property, in that kind of order of importance. And I would think like strategic management actions such as prescribed fire to reduce surface fuels and also reduce some stand density, because there's going to be some thermal thinning associated with that. But in particular, what I think is really important is for us to be able to practice fuels reduction thinning in around some of these vulnerable communities. Because in some cases, prescribed fire is not going to get us where we need to be in terms of reducing the risk of a big fire spreading at high intensity and severity into vulnerable communities. But I think a combination of thinning and burning and then some buffer strips and things like that could be used to our advantage to try to protect against the really big burns that are going to crop up in the pine barrens, but maybe we can try to isolate those fires to the more core areas of the pine barrens and let those burn in a sense, but just really focus our efforts on protecting the vulnerable communities. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in, also from a, prescribed fire and even a personnel safety standpoint too. I know, so there's that, but then there's also the ecological aspect of combining management techniques, right? So prescribed fire, oftentimes now, even though we are able to do prescribed fire during the growing season, most of the time that happens in the winter. And so that has results in a very different end result than if you were to do a prescribed fire during the growing season, right? So during the dormant season, you aren't necessarily, you may be burning up some fuel, but you're not necessarily setting back succession. Whereas if you do that in the summertime, that's where you could potentially be changing, changing the habitat type for different species from an ecological perspective. Then also, right, we start to see some of these areas in the pinelands that have, haven't seen fire and have not been thinned. And, with speaking to some of the folks at the Forest Fire Service, they don't even want to touch that in terms of going in and doing a prescribed burn because of the complexity in how that, that forest may respond to that and some of the issues. So, I think from both an ecological perspective and a public safety and the personnel of the folks who are doing all of this work, it's important to kind of consider all of the different types of management objectives and strategies that we can be using to, to achieve multiple different things. and then I know, Bob can probably speak to this a little bit better with the wood product aspect, but right, you mentioned you are, you're working on an Atlantic white cedar that had fallen during Sandy. And, and that was one of the reasons why we talked about removing wood products from an area, is that fuel reduction, right? So if you've got a significant amount of slash and it's from Atlantic white cedar and it's drying out and it's rotting and a fire comes through there, I mean, that is a surefire way to, no pun intended, for the the flames to reach the crowns and potentially go even further. So so there's a lot to be said, and and it's, I think the thing that I really want to stress too is that all of this is very complicated, and it is very, very, there are lots of interactions that are happening, and that, that we need to be able to adaptively manage and react to different situations. So I don't know if Bob wants to take that question on as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to say something. South Jersey's pine forests certainly extend far beyond what we view as the Pinelands Reserve. They're just lines on a map that the government, but that forest goes way beyond that. And we have a real problem. We actually need more fire. We have this high risk, but at the same time, this forest needs more fire. So I'll talk about the fire that just happened a little bit, that would give some, at least my perspective of what we're not doing. I've been to that site in the last few days, and it's absolutely magnificent in terms of the ecological benefit of what that fire did, and we need more of that. But having said that, there's more going on that we need to be thinking about. And if there's all this concern about carbon, then we need to be thinking about where this carbon emission fits into whatever plan the government eventually comes up for these lands. So here we have a fire that was started arbitrarily by some campers, which, the last big fire in Spring Hill, that was the same way. Woke up in the morning and, oh my, there's a fire. And the Forest Fire Service, which are extremely good and professional at controlling fires, attacked this fire. And as Emil said yesterday, took advantage to then apply fire to much more land than what this fire was going to burn. And I suspect the purpose of that was to take advantage to reduce fuels. They are somewhat restricted in the availability of burn days when we can burn, and I certainly see why you would do that. But there's some other things going on here. First off, if you look at the smoke plumes from that fire, you're looking at carbon emissions that probably exceed all the diesel trucks in New Jersey in 1 year, in 2 days. So that's an issue. If you look at, we're talking about the loss of big old stands of trees that we want to store carbon in. Since there's no plan for this land, we don't know how many stands of those trees were killed. Those trees are now beginning to decay already, and will emit carbon for the next 20 years or so as they fall and decay. But the real concern, I think, ecologically, is when you go in there, which I have done, and you see the loss of the organic peat soils. This is a serious problem in terms of losing, instead of the forest being this great storage of carbon, we're losing carbon there that's been stored in that soil for thousands of years, and the loss of more cedar. And we have a concern about the loss of that ecosystem. So the overall point I'm trying to make is we need a plan. if we had a plan for Wharton Forest, the government's owned it now for close to 70 years. There's no plan. If that plan delineated the plant communities, the vegetation types, we may make better decisions on when and how we're going to enhance the fire. Certain areas, if the manager was aware, they could have maybe been wetting down those cedar stands or something. But since there's no plan, let's just go light a match and create a fire because we know the forest will respond to that. How do we avoid these negative, significant negative results when we can do better? There's no question in my mind that some modest judicious use of forestry techniques can set these forests up in a much better position where we can manage these forests and in fact start fires purposely for the ecological benefit of the land and avoid these negative impacts. There's no question.
Bob, I'm sorry, if you can just wrap it up in a few.
Well, what I'm saying is we need to start managing these forests properly. I don't want to see our forests managed because some camper arbitrarily set a fire and then we react to that.
Gotcha. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Matt. Eileen, you were saying like mixing it up from yesterday's questions with today. Do we give maybe Andy a chance because he was the first one?
Yeah, let's mix it up because I have Andy from yesterday.
Yeah.
And back here.
I wanted to say something about this question. This
Emil,
is Emil.
Emil, can you just like be, yes, go ahead, but please be short.
I'll be super brief.
Thank you.
So I agree with Bob. We need a plan for Wharton State Forest that takes into account many of the things that Bob and Kristen already said. We do need growing season burns in certain locations based on the habitat type in order to promote rare species and rare plants and do all sorts of ecological things. The state has been reluctant to do growing season burns forever. Only in the recent last few years is the state starting to consider in the upper level management of DEP some ideas concerning how to go about doing growing season burns. We were talking about at the Rutgers ecology lunches 40 years ago about how to do growing season burns in the Pine Barrens and what needs to be done. State's lagging 40 years behind. Having said that, I don't want to conflate the Pine Barrens with the rest of New Jersey, right? Because it's very different. And the idea that we should be harvesting cedar from cedar has been almost gone, right? We've lost 80% of our cedar. It's bad enough that we're harvesting it from private lands to send it to Carolina to come back to Home Depot. That's the last thing that we should be doing, is harvesting live cedar on our public lands to send it to North Carolina to come back to Home Depot. I mean, that's just crazy. We've lost almost all our cedar, and many times when we harvest it, we don't get it back. And that's true for approved forestry plans on private land. I think Bob Williams' plans, I've seen some of his results where he gets the cedar back. I don't know about all the other foresters, but I've seen plenty of places where the cedar is harvested and it never comes back because there's no follow-up. So, you know, all these issues are complex. And then the only other thing I wanted to say was, well, I think I said it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But the main thing is that we should not be conflating all the different complexities of ecological burning in the Pine Barrens and harvesting in the Pine Barrens. Oh, thinning from the ground up. The DEP is finally starting to do thinning from the ground up where they don't overly thin the forest. They don't hardly open the canopy. You can hardly tell that they've been there. They did one for us on the Franklin Parker Preserve, and they left all the material on site. Nothing was removed. So that's what we need to be doing to protect sensitive areas from wildfire, is thinning from the ground up and leaving the material on site. Thank you.
Thanks, Emil. Andy, please.
Oh, Andy, one more thing. There was a question in the chat on the survey. Someone asked how many respondents there were, and I forgot to say it was 127. So I just want to put that out there.
Thanks, Eileen. Andy.
Okay. So I'm trying to outdo Frank here real quick. I'm calling from a boat out in a large lake. I caught this fish This is lake trout, I think, something like, I'm just kidding, Frank. I don't know if you heard me. I'm just being funny.
Thank you, Andy, for
There
the
you go.
knowledge
Hey, so
today.
the question I have two. Number one, for Bob, and then the second one's for Matt. So for Bob, yesterday he said something about cutting, I think 10,000 acres of Atlantic white cedar in South Jersey. And in light of our survey that talked about cutting trees and removals, describe why you're cutting those trees and why the necessity to remove them. And then secondly, my second question is for Matt Olson. Matt, I was wondering if you could talk about, I heard you talk about climate change and adaptability and resilience. Could you kind of just talk a little bit about that? Because we talk a lot about carbon and climate change, but you have talked about kind of adaptability a few times in different presentations you've given. So Bob and then Matt would be great.
Well,
Oh, no, come on.
since colonial times, cedar has been steadily cut and steadily declined in terms of the acreage that it covers. The sites that supported cedar are still there. The primary, one of the primary reasons is if other species such as black gum or red maple, and some of the shrub species such as pepper bush or high bush blueberry, there are others, and pitch pine capture the site before cedar can capture the site itself. It is not tolerant of shade, so it tends to, over time, drop out of the site. Some cedar may hang on, and anecdotal. There could have been 100-acre stand back in 1700. 20 acres came back. They came back 60 years later. They took that stand. So it's been this chipping away at it. It does tolerate stand replacement by fire as long as the seed bank and the turf is not burned out. If you lose the organic soil base and the seed bank, that cedar's not coming back. Beavers do a pretty good job of flooding and eliminating it today. So if we fast forward to modern times today, most cedar stands are sort of fragmented remnants of what was once there. And if we rely on natural disturbance, say a hurricane or windstorm or a fire or something, the problem becomes that the other species occupying all the land around them sort of overwhelm the cedar's ability to regenerate. In past times, when cedar dominated wetland drainages and a hurricane took it down, it was the dominant seed source. It recaptured those sites readily. Cedar is an aggressive regenerator if given the right. We get an average of 5,000 to 10,000 seedlings per acre when it's allowed to grow. So we find ourselves, after we have pretty good repeated scientific studies of Atlantic white cedar, including 30 years recently by George Zimmerman, we know what to do. We can bring it back. Others tell me, and I believe it, it's a globally threatened ecosystem. We're losing it. Just drive around and you'll see plenty of dead stands of cedar for a wide range of, it's lost to agriculture, it was certainly lost to logging, it was certainly lost to building a road and then changing the hydrology. So we're losing it. The state of New Jersey made a decision several years ago to seek funding through the Natural Resources Damaging Act. They hired me. I did the assessments on what those costs would be. We spent 2 years out on the land evaluating where it would be best to spend those dollars. And those sites are now occupied by Atlantic white cedar competitors, red maple, black gum, pitch pine. Red maple is an aggressive tree that is expanding in all the forests here in the Northeast. We have no concern that we're going to lose red maple as a species or red maple swamps. So I think politically and socially, the decision has made this is important. Since the creation of the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan, it's always been indicated the need to restore Atlantic white cedar. In order to do that, you're going to have to cut its competitor. And so that's why, you know, when and if the state presents their plan, it's going to require the cutting of a lot of trees. Now, the regeneration of those stands, which I've stressed to the state, is extremely variable. We should work.
Bob, I'm sorry for interrupting. If you can just wrap it up in like a minute.
Well, in any event, that's the crux of why we would cut trees. And it makes sense to utilize that wood, if possible, to supplement our need of wood products.
Tom?
I think we're going to take maybe like 15 more minutes more of questions, and then we're going to move on to a conversation about consensus, right? So,
Yeah.
So Eileen, if you want to call.
Yeah, maybe something, there's a lot of hands up. We can't get to everything, but we wanted to hear from people that we haven't heard from a lot. So I'm going to look at the list from yesterday and the hands that are up. And I see a Richard Kelsky. We haven't heard from him ever before. I think it's a new name. So you are unmuted, Richard, if you have a question. And if it's for a particular person, rather than go through all of the folks, if your question's for a particular person, please indicate that.
No problem. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Rich Kelsky. I've been on the board of the New Jersey Forestry Association for many, many years. I manage a fairly large property in northern New Jersey that I own. I am a little out of place on timing, so I apologize, but my question relates towards consensus, but I may not be able to stay for the end of the call. So I wanted to get it on the table. If you wouldn't mind bringing up the second survey, I have a question on that I think may help you define consensus a little bit better going forward. I'll just wait for you to do that.
You want us to share the screen, Richard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please. I think it's up. I think it's up. And I think that this screen and the other one as well has the same analysis. When I look at this, I look at the yellow section, which is the removal for commercial, including generation of revenue, as a subset of the orange. And I don't think they should be looked at separately. Because if the yellow, it's interesting that on the removal side, there are two questions, which allow that to be striated into two separate groups, when in fact, they're really the same. The yellow is a subset of the orange. And that if the yellow did not exist, most certainly those people would vote the orange. So when you're looking at this and you're saying, well, this is very even, or this is evenly split, the clear vast majority are in favor of removal, one for finer purposes than another, but both are in favor of removal. And I see the same thing on the first chart. And I just want to point that out when you're trying to interpret consensus, that I would ask you, please don't look at it as just, oh, these are separate thoughts and have to be looked at separately, and therefore the arguments are different. So I just make that point. I know consensus is important for this task force. And by the way, I think you've done a great job on the presentations today and previously. And I just want to point that out so that we don't get misled by the breakdown of removal and cutting into two categories, whereas the opposing view is only a single category and therefore is an aggregate. So that's my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. Eileen, Tom, and Andy, in the spirit of hearing from people that have not spoken before, I think Rita has never right? I've spoken before, so Rita, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me? I don't know if my
Yeah, we can hear you.
my video's not on. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, the great discussion. And I was hoping to be persuaded one way or the other, you know, because I have my own biases coming into this meeting. You know, what really comes to my forefront, and this is a question for Bob Williams, that with all the Pineland, Eastern White Cedar restoration efforts, and I hope this doesn't go the wrong way here. I'm talking about the post-Sandy work that was done, as well as the $19 million project that's ongoing now. A lot of historic efforts have been done and are going to be needed going forward for this project. But my question is, Bob, do you think this is going to succeed? And I'm only going to say that because we have not the ideal conditions for this white cedar to grow, right? We have these rising sea levels. So you have all those ghost forests that have cropped up on the shoreline. I don't think those are going to be restored. I don't think. I think we're looking a couple of feet in elevation up in the other parks that are being restored. But do we also have the time? And I think time is really of the essence here, especially with climate change. And so that's my one point. And along the same thread of thought is that, and I think Emil has said this before, and other people have said it as well, that we really have to look at the Pine Barrens as its own separate entity, aside from North Jersey. Really, they're two different ecosystems and two different. They have different needs. You know, the fires are really important. Fire control is really important down south, but not so much up here. You know, so you really, and I think if you separate the two into two different classes, and I know Mike Van Cleef and some others had talked about different zoning. You know, you would come to a place where, yeah, we can't log in certain places. Let's grow our old forests. Okay. So there is a question in here somewhere. So I guess, Bob, do you think this will work?
Thanks, Frida. Bob, if you could just, wrap
I'll
up
try to
your
be brief.
answer in
I'll
2
try
minutes.
to be brief.
Thank
Uh,
you.
If the right thing is done, there's every reason that it can be successful. And the reason for that is, number one, you're correct. There is no proposal to put cedar back where there's possible sea level or saltwater intrusion. The areas are very secure that way. The other thing that we did was, there are particular sites where the seed source is just right. Success should happen. I'm not, if the government does the right thing at the right time, as the procedure goes forward, we should have great success. And it would be a great thing to see, because it would be the first project that people could, once they see that success, they could begin to rally around forestry that restores our forests. We have every reason to believe it will succeed. It's complicated, true, but we've laid it out. We know what to do. Now, if they don't follow through on every issue, they will fail. But we have every reason to be optimistic that this money is going to be well spent, and it is a project that will receive national recognition in the forestry world. New Jersey could be the spearhead of finally doing the right thing. These forests are not being restored so they can be logged someday. They're not. Logging may occur. We don't know what's going to happen in 100 years. Some restoration may require, but that is not the purpose, is to put it back there and let it grow. And cedar will grow to 500 years old. We have examples of that. So That's my position. I have no doubt that's what the public wants. And I hope they get their act together and do what they're supposed to do.
Thanks, Bob. Next, Tim. Just giving folks that have not spoken before a chance. Tim, you can unmute yourself.
All right. I'm with the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, and my question is pretty much what the other previous questioner just asked. I would say the Trail Conference would be in general opposed to logging and even tree removal on public forest land in the north of the state under most circumstances, but I also split my time between North Jersey and Cape May County, where I am, and I'm involved in some environmental issues down here. And I think, I mean, I guess the question for everybody is, shouldn't this group treat the southern forests very different from the upland forests in North Jersey? I know, I'm well aware that there is fire danger down here, and I know that there are times fire can be very healthy in forests. At the same time, down here, I think there's a real risk that you could see people get very seriously hurt, damaged. So that's, from my perspective, from what I know about the environment, and I was in the forest industry for 25 years myself, so I'm not opposed to logging. I just think the pine forests in the south of New Jersey are very, very different ecologically than what we have in North Jersey. So should we consider them differently as a group?
I think we're hearing some consensus on that, Tim, that we should consider them differently.
Okay, I mean, that's all, you know.
All right, thank you. Leslie, I'm going to skip you just because, you know, you've had a lot of opportunity to speak. I just want to give Lindsay a chance because we haven't heard from her. Lindsay, you can.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I had an opportunity to read the Sparta Forest Stewardship Plan. This question is for Sarah Webb. And it kept talking about that the reason that they're cutting the trees is for the golden winged warbler. And I wanted to ask about the history of the golden winged warbler in New Jersey, since this seems to be such a big priority. Also, I was in Sparta with a filmmaker, and we were kind of measuring the size of the trees that were cut, and noticed that the biggest trees seemed to be cut. And I just had a question about that too for Sarah, if she seems to know about that topic. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Those are good questions. I'd like to talk about the second question first and maybe defer to others that are more expert on golden winged warbler. But yes, the golden winged warbler has been a reason for much of the cutting of forests on our North Jersey forested lands. And I definitely agree with the point we have to talk about South Jersey very differently, of course. But in North Jersey, there's a challenge when you try to manage for one species, even if it's very endangered. And that is the case right now. And many people will say the golden winged warbler is not likely to benefit excessively from the huge clear cuts that we are having and seeing in northern New Jersey. Very vast swaths, and especially, as you noted, the largest oak trees that are most valuable, and the wood is removed, which is ecologically an unsound process. So I'd like to just follow up on some of the other questions by saying more broadly that we really need to use science in these decisions. We need to have scientific information from the science literature, not from people's opinions, letters, even reports that have come out from groups or individuals. Peer-reviewed scientific literature is where we must go to resolve this question about whether we should be logging in the way that Lindsay has described. And one of the things that people have been discussing last time, and I didn't get to respond to, is the storage of carbon. And our forest ecosystems on our public lands are storing carbon for centuries when we have the large trees. And the sequestration, contrary to what someone said last time, increases with age. For 87% of tree species, if we remove the large trees, we're sacrificing future capacity for more carbon sequestration. And the forest disturbance by logging, which is happening everywhere, and I call it logging, even though I know many people find that term offensive, but if you visit the site, you recognize that's what it is. It's removal of cutting of large trees and removing them. But that kind of disturbance accelerates these losses of carbon sequestration, and we're in a climate crisis, as I said in my remarks yesterday. So we really can't say that we're storing more carbon because we have wood products. Those are very short-lived. Look at the science. If you look at my proposal or my submission online, you'll find that there are many scientific articles with my 2,500 words that are cited, and they're very clear about what happens when you cut down large forests. They're very clear that wood products do not last as long as people say, and processing a log into wood products and removing it uses a huge amount of energy and of course destroys the ecosystem. So we also have these ecological problems with clearing of vast forest for the golden wing warbler. And I know people also aim to do that for young forests. And I spoke about that last time when I was speaking, that we should not be creating young forests out of our older forests, because the older forests are incredibly important to our climate defense. And they will not be that if they're cut or replaced with small, younger forests. And then again, I'll just reiterate what's been said before, that once you do this logging in northern New Jersey, you do not get the return of a forest because of the invasive species that will creep in, and because of deer. Yes.
Sarah, if you can, okay, you're done?
Yes, thank you.
And I would like to, for the first question on the golden wing warbler, sorry, I would like to give Kristen the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thanks. So, so I think that the other thing is we are using science as well, right? A lot of the work that that we are doing is based in science, and I can see a lot of your heads shaking. And but the fact of the matter is we are also using science. So I think there are a couple different things that I want to point out, right? So the first aspect is the fact that the work that has occurred at Sparta Mountain, while golden wing warbler is the target species, it is not the only species that project is targeting. There are, and I will cite, there's a study that came out of the University of New Hampshire. There have been multiple other studies that have been in Pennsylvania in similar hardwood forests, where they looked at interior forest nesting birds. And I said this in my talk yesterday, right? And I am only focusing on a handful of species right now because it would be too complex to be able to, to go through everything. But there are interior forest birds, cerulean warbler, wood thrush, there are red-eyed vireo, different species that nest in the interior. However, that is critically important. So I am not suggesting, and New Jersey Audubon does not condone destroying all old growth forests. What is important is to create that mosaic, right? That is what we are talking about. We are not talking about converting the 3,500 acres of Sparta Mountain into all early successional habitat. That is not the goal. The goal is to take a portion of that. And right now, there is only about 10 acres that are able to be cleared as part of the forest stewardship plan per year. So every year, those patches are going to be growing back up into forest. And so I want to be clear, right? There is 3,500 acres of Sparta Mountain. 10 acres per year for 10 years is not a large part of the forest. What that is doing is it is creating a patchwork and mosaic for the species that need interior forests for nesting and open patches for foraging. And, so that is overall the goal of this work.
Chris,
And
if you can just wrap it up.
Yeah, sure. So, so I want to be clear that old growth forest is critically important. It really is. And that is not, we recognize that and we understand that. And we know that that is a big portion of the work that we're doing, but so is early successional forest and young forest. And having those areas nearby gives those species the ability to use multiple resources at once.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, Sarah. Tom, please.
Okay, folks, I know there's still a lot of questions there, and I mean, I think we could probably spend days just continuing to discuss, and I would suggest to some degree, I think what we're doing is we're debating these issues. I think more than anything else, what's going on here is we're having a debate, right? And I think, there are different perspectives out there. I think by and large, folks are, continuing to share the perspectives that they have. They're asking, we're asking each other questions. There's some learning and information sharing going on, and that's useful. But I'm not sure how much progress we're really making when it comes to trying to tease out if there's anything, that we might be able to agree on, and if there's any opportunities to bridge some of these different perspectives that we have. So we want to try to shift the conversation a little bit. We can't continue. I don't think it's a good use of everyone's time to continue, at great length to continue to sort of have this debate. And if we're not really sort of changing, if no one's changing their mind, right? And we're not making any progress towards consensus. So we want to take, until maybe 6 o'clock to have a little bit of a conversation. What I would suggest, the goal is to determine, is there any consensus here to be had or not? Because if there's no consensus here to be had, we should probably wrap up this conversation. We can put these issues to a vote. We can document where people are. And my suspicion would be that in a lot of cases, we're clearly not going to have consensus. We may not even have like supermajority views on a lot of issues. And what have we accomplished? We can report to the legislature, okay, well, we've documented the strongly held positions that various parties had, but we didn't really make any headway. And that's sort of what could be the end product of all this. I think that would be a shame. I think there's potential here to do more than that. I think all 4 co-chairs have a desire to do more than that. And so can we talk for the rest of this hour about not what we disagree on, but what might we agree on? It's a totally different question, right? So, get into a different space in your mind, right? And think about, things that, you've heard over the course of the last, meetings, the last 2 days and previous meetings. I'd love to hear if we can have everybody put their hand down. We want to get rid of the hands from the previous, right? And handle this a different way. I want to hear people, if you have thoughts on things that maybe we might agree on, things that you've heard that you think we might agree on. And if we can do this a little more like a lightning round, right? Because it's hard. People are frustrated. There's a lot of people that want to talk, and it's been hard to get to a lot of people because we've had a lot of, lengthy exchanges. So I would like to hear relatively quick thoughts from as many people as possible of things that maybe we might be able to agree on. So we'll try something different. So it looks like we've got Jean has a thought on something we might agree on.
Yeah, and actually I had my hand up because that's exactly what I wanted to do. So it was perfect. And I kept on putting my hand, anyway. For you who don't know me, I was a decision maker in government for a long time. I was the deputy commissioner and commissioner at DEP under Florio in the early 90s. I was the regional administrator at EPA Region 2 under Clinton for 7 years. And energy and utilities and environment are my thing. I teach climate change now. I've been doing it at Columbia School of International Public Affairs for 8 years now. And at Rutgers Blaustein School, I'm teaching a graduate course with Mike Winka on energy sustainability and policy. I have changed my mind, Tom, because great presentations by experts, and I always rely on experts. I can't know everything. And great questions from the people who asked a lot of questions. And I think we can agree on a lot of things. First of all, to me, because of the climate crisis, this isn't climate change anymore, it's a crisis. We have to have carbon sequestration and storage as much as we can do. I love birds. a member of Audubon. I just pay the stuff. I read their magazines. But to me, the issue is saving this world and our future as best as we can from the climate crisis. I think, obviously, I think everybody agrees on science. There are different kinds of science, but you have to look at all of them. And I think we had heard a lot of that. I think it's clear that we need to study each forest area separately. Now, we all know the Pine Barrens, which is a unique ecosystem for the entire world, which I used to go, actually still canoe, and it's in the cedar water that we canoe, so you can't see the snakes and stuff. We need to preserve that. That is completely different than any other forest, any other wooded area in this state. I think that we would agree that we should look at these differently, studying each area separately. It's possible, I don't know as much about North Jersey, that I'm from South Jersey myself, I live in New Brunswick now, but it's possible that the Sparta Mountain area might be treated differently than other North Jersey areas if there is a significant difference between them. So I really think we need to pin down that. Then finally, only removing live trees if there's a good reason for that, i.e. the Atlantic white cedar, and the issue about the large old trees and not logging if they're alive makes complete sense to me because they hold so much carbon. It's an important thing to do. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jean. So let's keep it moving. I want to keep these rapid so we can hear from as many people as possible. So Kristen, your thoughts on things we might agree on.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Ace. I'm chair of the Morristown Shade Tree Commission, but I'm representing myself today. I've learned a lot. Thank you for everything that everybody has presented. I'm really hoping that we can come to some compromise. The things that I heard that made sense to me is treating every area differently. So there's a lot of experts on their areas. So let's use those experts in those areas. Let's pick some forestry that has to remain old growth. Let's pick some forestry that we want to designate for the birds, however that works out, the meadows. Let's make sure that we're paying attention to the soil. There was an interesting soil presentation. And for me, boots on the ground, it's really super important that we handle the invasive crisis because, in our little towns here, our shade tree commissions are up against trying to save tiny forests from massive invasions. And it's frightening. And we drive along the roads and we see our forestry dying on the roads because there's Atlantis and there's barberry and there's porcelainberry. So we need some kind of laws to manage that properly so that we don't lose our tiny forests while you guys are all working on the big forestry issues. So I just learned a lot. I love what everybody presented, but I think we have to compromise here. None of us can take a hard line. Otherwise, we're going to have legislators coming through, slashing and burning and making decisions for our forestries that don't have any expertise. So I did love the idea of separating out New Jersey and treating each section differently with an expert.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kristen. Great, let's go to Miriam. Someone asked Miriam to unmute.
My thought too is that we should deal with invasives. That would be something we can all agree on.
Perfect, thank you. I love it. Brevity. Keep it going, folks. Oh, I'm going to pause for a minute. We did get a note that we don't ask the people on the phone if they want to speak. How do we handle that? If someone's on the phone, are they like muted or do we have to unmute them or?
I think they can't raise their hand, but they can be
On the
unmuted.
phone?
So what I'm doing is I'm asking them to unmute themselves, but they also have to press *6 to be able to speak.
All right, so if you're on the phone, you're being unmuted, but you then have to press *6 so that you're able to speak. And if there's someone on the phone that wants to jump in on this, again, something that we might agree on, you're probably just going to have to speak up. So.
Yeah. Oh.
Is there anyone on the phone that wants to speak up?
See the phone number 546 ending in 5468 that is no longer on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't really have much to say on this topic, but I have things to say on a lot of other topics, which I've never been able to talk about. But I do think the focus, first of all, is that we need to speak about public lands. And those public lands were achieved by means of taxation from the public who decided they wanted to save those lands. Never did they vote to use their tax dollars, which would then be used to make lumber profiteers into millionaires. Never was that the intention of how the public lands came about. And when we talk about public lands, everybody paid for them. They paid for them on the county level, the local level, the state level. And for that reason alone, they need to be protected because it's
Thank you for your
corrupt
point.
government.
We heard your point, but we're talking about points of agreement right now. So we did hear your point. Thank you. But we are focused on points of agreement right now. So we're going to get back to that.
If the other person on the phone would like to say something, because that person is not on mute. So I'm thinking.
Is there someone else on the phone that wanted to say something?
Ending in
Preferably about things we might agree on.
Yes. Okay, we don't hear anything. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, let's go back to John. And again, I try to make these brief points of possible agreement. Is John unmuted?
Yes, hi. Yeah, briefly, I think there's been a lot of statement about that we don't know what we have in the state. So a mapping effort, I think would be really critical to essentially inventory in more detail what we actually have. And then, as others have said, South Jersey being unique, the Pinelands, deer, invasives, and what we've heard a little less of, but there is at least one proposal about a youth conservation corps. I would think that's the type of thing that people could get behind, you know, some greater amount of invasive strike force, that type of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we do actually have some proposals along those lines. Great. Thank you. Erica.
Hey, just quickly, kind of incorporating what Bob was saying about that master plan, that we could do some sort of inventory that would capture what we really have. And then incorporating kind of what Vin and Matt had said, parsing those out into active and passive management zones, and also incorporating what Chief Mann had said too, because I think that's important, and having them, you know, find these grandfather and directional trees as part of that master plan.
Thank you, Erica.
Yep.
Let's go to Paul. Is Paul able to? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it took a second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I wrote something in the chat. I'm just going to respond to it. I think it's something we can agree on, the majority of us. And it's something we're trying to avoid. So we're trying to avoid creating an economic driver that would encourage cutting and removal of trees for economic instead of ecological purposes. So we don't want to create a profit motive for somebody to come in and take trees out. Okay, so that's I think that everybody can agree on that. Maybe there are a few hangouts. A second thing I'd like to say, and this hasn't been discussed much, and I don't even think it's within our purview, but I really think we need to acquire more lands for preservation. Like, we should really be emphasizing that. What I see in my area is everything being cut down for development. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Susan.
Actually, Susan signed in. It's Doug.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Doug.
We're watching it, but I was just going to say, I think even folks that were in favor of active management agreed that some of the oldest, best trees should be saved. I think that we could sort of all agree that some of the most unique and beautiful areas should be saved. And I know there was a lot of agreement on proposals that we have, but the disagreement was that we didn't save everything. I don't want folks to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just because we can't save everything doesn't mean we can't designate something to be saved. So my suggestion is identify and save some of these areas. That's it. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. Julia.
So you got in under my.
Yeah.
I think there's quite a lot of agreement on things. Climate, no question, carbon sequestration has to guide everything. Deer management, unless we control the deer, we're never going to have anything growing. Leave trees that are over 100 years old. I think that, or even less than that. It's the little trees that can go. The set-asides, particularly the mule maps. Everybody at the beginning, has talked about set-asides. 5, North Jersey is not the Pines. I think we can all agree on that. We inventory what we've got, but not just our public lands. We have to inventory the whole forest because we don't know what we've got without doing that. It has to be both public and private forests. Soils, we don't talk about soils. And yet I think there's tremendous agreement on the importance of sequestering carbon in our soils. And then the public deserves a voice. We should not be writing plans. And I think everybody will agree on that. We shouldn't be writing plans without the public being able to comment. That's it. I'm happy to give you the list.
Thank you, Julia. Ted? Is Ted able to unmute? There you go, Ted.
Okay, I had voted blue, no removal of wood products at all. I'd now move into the red category. Obviously, we need some sorts of management, but I would reject what Richard Kinski had to say. I think that when you get into removing trees simply to make money, I think that's far outside of, I would hope it's outside of what most of us feel, and is completely against the idea of carbon sequestration. And carbon sequestration has the advantage that it's also going to maintain interior forest habitat. I could say something about golden-winged warblers, but there's not time to do that. And they're probably going to get merged with blue wings anyway. I had voted blue because I don't want there to be any excuse of management to really do substantial logging for wood products. It may be possible, as was suggested earlier, to remove cedars that are already dead and not fixing any more CO2. But remember, you go in, you're trampling the habitat with the trucks and equipment. So you have to be pretty close to ruling that out. But a little bit of management for the ecological health of the forest, and particularly the CO2 fixation, is something I would hope we can agree on.
Excellent. Thank you, Ted. Elliot?
I think we all understand that we're not going to come to an agreement on the places where we should cut, but we seek the least common, the lowest common denominator. We may come to an agreement of places we all agree we should be cutting. And I'd like to defer to Leslie Sauer to tell us, in her opinion, where those places and circumstances would be. And I'd be very surprised if the majority of us didn't agree that that's where we should be allowing this activity.
I'm sorry, Elliot, where it should be allowed?
Yes, what circumstances and what conditions do we cut trees on public land?
Okay, well, we can come back to that. I want to keep going with the points of agreement though, but that's a different point that you're raising. That's, in terms of we might agree where it should happen. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Emil?
So we've gone into great depth on Atlantic White Cedar, and I've got the feeling that we probably would be able to come to consensus on supporting the state's project, given the caveats that many of us have mentioned about, doing it carefully, doing it exactly at the right time, doing it the right way, and still being able to remove some of that maple and pine and everything that Bob talked about. I think we've gone so deep into that might be something that we could already come to consensus on, because we really fleshed it out and dispelled some misconceptions. I'd like to hope that we can do the same thing for projects for rare species or sensitive species management in North Jersey. And using the example that's already happened, I know there was one example, at least on Sparta Mountain, where nothing was removed. It was a project, I can't remember which stand number it was. It was up on one of the more northeasterly ridges where, one of the nonprofit organizations helped out and just did some cutting, and there was no removal. And I'm wondering if we know if that was a success. And if it was, then that's the kind of thing that maybe we could get consensus on. I've done projects up in Tranquility Ridge on Passaic County land for rattlesnakes. And the hope was one of them was for golden wing warbler. And, I don't know the latest year's data that may have been collected by the Endangered Species Program, whether or not it worked at first, worked very quickly, but then I don't know. So I'm thinking that there are projects where we cut in North Jersey that, by the examples that have already happened, where cutting has been allowed, but nothing's been removed for specific purposes, that we could come to consensus on a menu of things like that.
Okay, so your point sounds similar to Elliot. I think maybe that we actually might agree on some places where those kinds of projects should happen. Okay, all right, Nick, again, let's keep these quick and points of possible agreement.
I think we all, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I think we all agree, and hopefully there's no climate change deniers in this task force, but at times it sure sounds like it. Dr. William Manoa, when he made his presentation here, he should have been have given this task force the most effect for preservation of core forest remaining. And if you go to his web, you can Google his YouTube. It's called Simple Solutions to the Urgent Problem. And there's actually a plan that can be implemented by state legislators. And it goes all the way up to the UN. And it could even involve a constitutional change to protect core forest. And he has maps. They're called the Ecol maps, which Donald Trump actually took off the internet from the US Forest Service. And North Jersey is included in this big green biosphere all the way up to southern Maine. It's the biggest carbon sequestering photosynthesis north of the Smokies and east of the Montana and Idaho. So we need to pay more attention to the father of proforestation, and invasives are the biggest problem, and the other is abuse by human beings, litter, and various other managements that need to be done by law enforcement. And I'll leave it at that.
Got it. Good list. Thanks, Nick. Sylvia.
Yes, thank you. First of all, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sylvia Salone, New Jersey Forest Watch. We're an organization that's been documenting a lot of the ecological damage you can see behind me on Sparta Mountain. And so I concur with many of those who've already mentioned that our forests should be managed for carbon sequestration. And I think that should be our primary objective. I think most of us can agree to that. With that, you want to leave trees in the forest. So there are projects that can be done, like invasive species management. I think we all can agree how important that is here in New Jersey. We can girdle trees where needed. And additionally, looking at both North Jersey and South Jersey as different forest types, I think is very important. I think we can all agree what's appropriate in the South isn't necessarily appropriate in our highlands. And don't forget, our drinking water comes from both the Pinelands and the Highlands. So whatever activity we're proposing, we need to always keep that in mind. We need to, as Julia mentioned, have the public be more involved in actually helping to write the plans. Right now, the public has been ignored, and that's not good since we, the public, helped pay for our public lands. And another point that I don't hear anybody talking about, but I think we can all agree, is that we as a country, as a state, we need to move away from timber use and look at more sustainable agriculture choices like hemp. So why doesn't New Jersey look at increasing our hemp production? And that might be something that would put the pressure off on the timber industry. And yet we have so much ag land, we're the garden state. You know, perhaps we as a state could look at what New York is doing in hemp. So I think that could be an area of agreement. And then Nick mentioned what happens in a lot of these managed areas, if you will, is the ORV and ATV activities increase, and that's damaging and degrades our public areas. So I think we can all agree we need additional protections. And if we keep trees where they are, it will also limit the ORVs and ATV illegal activity. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. All right, let's keep this going because I really want to get through the list and hear everyone's thoughts on points of agreement. So Stephen.
Yeah, I think that we can all agree also that we don't want to incentivize logging, and we should include that as I guess a policy statement in whatever we do pass that removes that incentivization, or at least states a clear opposition to incentivization for logging. I also think that we can agree on doing an inventory of the public forest, because it's been noted by several people on here how we really actually don't know the full contents of each of the forests that New Jersey has in the public domain. That was it.
Got it. Thank you, Stephen. Larry.
Yes, Eric, I think summed up, the inventory and the planning. Everybody seems to be in agreement with that. I think preserving old growth is good, and I think everybody agrees with that. I think the devil is in the details, how many or how much, and there doesn't seem to be agreement on that, which needs to be worked out. I can tell you, in 38 years of working for Division of Fish and Wildlife, we never primarily cut forests for commercial purposes. We bid out cuts to get the job done. Sometimes that involves taking wood products out, but very often that's all they get. They don't pay us anything. So I think the point of the blue and the yellow and the orange merging, that question was worded such that I would have said, it's always an ecological objective, but sometimes wood products should move out to get the job done, whether that's because you need to clear the soil or get someone to do the job for you. And the other thing is, even preserving these old forests, growth forests, Dave Jenkins mentioned a few weeks ago, somehow we have to have built into even this preservation is adaptive management, that if something changes in the future, we can come back and change our minds. You just never can say never touch anything. So that's all I have.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Rita.
Yeah, hi. I think we could all agree on that invasive species are a real problem. And also the heavy deer browse is also a big problem. And they're related, right? The deer browsing and the invasive species are related Because when we have disturbed areas, what do you see when you're out there trying to find invasive species? You see that down in the disturbed areas, whether it's by a man or by nature or a woman. If there's a blowdown or there's an ash borer or something, and those trees come down, then the tasty stuff comes up. The trees come in, they eat it, and then what else lives? It's all that invasive garbage. So I think that's stuff we can agree on. I also think we probably, if we had a lot of money, we would want to make more forests for sure. Turn old farmlands into those young forests that we talked about. That would be nice. Let's not cut down our old forests. Their trees are they're so beautiful. And just the walk through a woods in the coolness of a woods. Just do it. Get DEP to get out there on their feet, off their trucks, into the woods with a backpack, a hand tool. I would love to see that. More of that. Yeah, we need all the other stuff too. We need the herbicides and blah, blah, blah. But really, we should be using a scalpel, not a sledgehammer when it comes to our forests. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Jim?
Thanks, Tom. I mean, I agree with a lot of people here. I think there are more consensus items than we recognize. So I'll lay out 4 concepts and we'll see if that's correct. I think we agree on managing forests for a number of things. We've talked about ecological integrity and biodiversity. We've talked a lot about climate resilience. And I would add watershed health, which hasn't been mentioned, but up here in North Jersey, where I'm living, that's a critical part of the equation. I think secondly, we've talked about the need to develop prescriptions that reflect forest conditions. The forests in Northern Jersey are very different from the forests in the Pinelands. And so we need to recognize those differences as we develop management prescriptions. And a lot of people have talked about the need to inventory the forests. A lot of that information is readily available. The state has information. The Forest Service does a great deal of analysis and inventory. So does the Fish and Wildlife Service, and those data are readily available and could be, I think, put to use in developing management prescriptions. The third thing I'd suggest is that for public forests, decisions should be based on sound science, but I think also a robust public planning process so that plans are prepared. The public has an opportunity to comment on those plans. And I'd suggest appeal decisions if they don't like the outcome when decisions are made with regard to managing those forests. I've seen that work at the federal level, and I think it's something that should be adopted as we develop management plans for the state forests. I think the last thing I would emphasize is that I think we need to come to an understanding that managed public forest requires input from a lot of people. And I would suggest from a lot of different scientists. And I agree with Sarah Webb completely that sound science should be the foundation for making management decisions. But we need to take into account people's views and values as we make those decisions. So that would include wildlife managers, it would include foresters, people that understand watershed health. And one thing we haven't addressed, which is a new priority, at least in Trenton, is outdoor recreation. That's a big industry and it's growing here, and it could be a way to generate revenue from the forest without cutting trees. And I think that's a real plus. The last thing I want to mention is Gene Fox put emphasis on climate in deference to biodiversity. And I want to make clear that all the literature I've looked at shows that the two work hand in hand. If we manage forests to maintain or improve climate resilience, we're also going to achieve what we seek to achieve with regard to biodiversity. And biodiversity is one of the 2 areas identified as a worldwide priority by the UN. So we shouldn't forget that piece. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Jim. Matt?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm just going to quickly put a plug in for fuels reduction treatments in southern New Jersey. That would also include thinning from below, like Emil was describing, or bottom-up thinning. I think that we could be applying that in a way that would make sense to protect our vulnerable communities. And I also think that could be expanded, kind of build on some what Kristen was saying, expanded beyond those areas for ecological restoration, which would also help to reduce risk of wildfire at high intensity spreading into areas that are vulnerable. That's it.
Thank you, Matt. Gary?
Hi, the 2018 New Jersey greenhouse gas inventory indicates that we
currently sequester about 8 million tons of CO2 in forests and terrestrial lands. In order to meet the 2050 requirements for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, they predict that that number needs to be 12.3, roughly 50% higher. I think it would be a relatively straightforward thing, perhaps, for everybody to agree that the government and our state lands should be managing to try to meet that objective, at least for the state lands, of 50% increase in CO2 sequestration. And I think that's a simple sort of a consensus we might be able to find.
Thank you. So let me ask the people that still have your hands up. First of all, if you've already shared your point, if you could lower your hand just so we can narrow the universe. The people that still have their hands up, do any of you have a point of agreement that has not been said already? So if your point has already been said, just in the interest of time, please lower your hand. If you have a point that no one else has said, please leave your hand up. And we're just going to limit it kind of quickly to points that haven't already been made. So Doris has her hand up as a point that hasn't been made already.
Yes, hi, Doris Lynn, League of Humane Voters of New Jersey. A lot has been said about deer, but the more logging we have, the more edge habitat we'll have, the more early successional habitat we'll have, and the more deer we will have. So that's another reason to oppose commercial logging. Also, I think we can all agree.
Points of agreement, Doris. This doesn't sound like a point of agreement.
I think we can all agree that the Division of Fish and Wildlife has to stop increasing the deer population. You know, someone mentioned yesterday, in some areas of New Jersey, they're trying to maintain the population. In some areas, they're trying to increase the deer population. And they're doing this through farm leases, requiring the farmers to leave some of their crops unharvested for the deer. They're doing it through clear cutting and prescribed burns on wildlife management areas. They're partnering with private hunters and hunting clubs to plant crops for the deer because they want that overabundant deer herd and those trophy bucks.
Don't increase the deer population. Got it. I agree. That might be a point of agreement. Ken, something we haven't heard.
So first of all, I think that we need to all agree that we're only going to get agreement and even consensus when we focus on specificity in our definitions and stop using high-level euphemisms for things that could mean 1,000,001 different kinds of actions that, to me, is buying a pig in a poke, because I end up, being asked, well, how could you not agree with ecological health when ecological health could be something very specific that I like, and it's also been used to cut down the trees on Sparta Mountain. And if we continue to use that language, I will never vote for anything that is that high level that I can't understand what the hell it is.
Got it. Fair point. Okay. Again, only points we haven't heard before. Kathy?
Catherine?
Sorry, I'm just reading your screen. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, and on that note, thank you, Ken, to clarify the definition of inventories, which seems to be something everybody's agreeing on. If we're going to be doing inventories, they can't be slanted in favor of game species and songbirds. They would have to include all species, flora and fauna. Amphibians are never discussed, and they're incredibly important to forest health. Nobody ever seems to talk about interior forest species. They're just, conveniently swept under the rug. We do have very important interior forest species who, by the way, do breed in interior forests. It seems to me
all species. Got it. Okay, can we keep moving? We're running out of time. So
really quickly.
Go ahead. Oh, did Catherine get? Okay, we heard her point.
I'm back. Hello?
Okay. Go ahead.
I was saying about we need to include all species.
Yeah, we got that.
Very obvious that Fish and Wildlife is favoring game species.
All right, we got your point. You're making the same point again, Catherine. We're moving on. Joe.
I think we can all agree that we have an impressive array of experts and not experts on this task force. That said, many people have made the point about assessing what we do not know. And I suggest the way to achieve that sort of survey and assessment of floristic quality and so on, is to impanel an objective science panel. I think that would be something we could all agree on. The rub might be how to achieve that panel, who might be sitting on it, but I think a panel of objective scientists that we could all respect, and some of them sit on this task force for sure, but I think that's one way to achieve this assessment, which is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Rich, point we haven't heard.
Peer management.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Love the brevity. Laura?
I think we would foster more trust if we didn't have such minimal regulation of forestry as it is. I think we should not be exempting forestry from flood hazard area rules. I think the services the forest provides in preventing flooding is something we really aren't talking about, but it's a big fat deal. And we're exempting forestry from the Flood Hazard Control Act. And well, there's a number of really important regulations that forestry is exempt from. And that, of course, causes really damaging projects to be legal. And I think that's where a lot of mistrust is coming from here, that we're talking about big projects run by the state, but there's a lot of little projects where a forestry firm comes in and talks a municipality into cutting down a bunch of stuff and they're exempt from everything and it's legal. So we need to have better regulations and as Ken said, with terms that are clearly defined so that people can trust the law and maybe even trust DEP, which is a big step.
Thank you, Laura. And in fact, we have a subgroup of this ecological health work group that has been really delving into those regulatory issues and trying to figure out that exact issue that you raised. So, Joe.
I've heard people from all over the spectrum over the last few months agree that we need to have better funded, maybe more independently funded DEP, timely inspection, enforcement, and reporting on what they're inspecting and enforcing. And they need to have power behind it. They need to be able to fine. And I think everyone who wants their plans done properly. Everyone who wants the whole world to agree that their plan was okay, there can't be abuses along the way. I think enforcement is something I heard a lot. DEP enforcement, well funded, come across many times. Super quick lightning round. Second one, I think we should we should focus on what we agree on, because when we do this, we're fighting each other, we're killing each other. And you think we're killing each other now? Wait till there's a different governor. And we need to be focused on conservation. And if we keep focusing, we all agree. I think we all agree. If we keep focusing on what we agree on, we'll all do a lot better for our organizations in our state.
Thank you, Joe. Chris?
Hi, of course, I want to emphasize all the things I agree with, but I'm not. I'm going to follow your directions. What I haven't heard yet that I do think we have a chance of agreeing on is having kind of a baseline that there is no commercial logging on public lands. You know, this sidestepping the issue of whether you have to thin or cut. There's nobody in the public signed up for that. It can't be done without heavy machinery. I mean, I think we could agree on the lack on keeping heavy machinery off our soils on public forest land, and therefore, you know, not selling. It sounds like from what Kristen told us about Sparta Mountain, it's not lucrative. But I mean, even if it were, but I don't think it is. So I hope we could agree on at least under some exceptional circumstance that could be defined. I mean, some process that there's almost a very, very high bar to any commercial products being sold from our public forests. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Dave?
Yeah, this is something I hope we can agree on, and that is we've heard a lot about carbon sequestration, and that goes to climate change mitigation. But the other aspect of climate change that we have to face is adaptation. And adaptation on behalf of biodiversity is part of that adaptation. And I think in light of all of that, mitigation and adaptation, that we have to keep as many tools in our toolbox as possible. That's it.
Thank you, Dave. Peter?
Hi.
it's been said, I'm afraid, but deer management, I'd like to hear a plan. I haven't really heard a plan as to how that can be done. And I have some ideas about that, but this is not the time for it.
Right. I do think we're going to be talking about that issue at some point for sure.
We have many
Leslie.
proposals on that, so.
Yes,
that's
we have
for the
proposals
future.
that we will be getting into at some point.
Okay.
Leslie.
Yes, thank you. I think it's apparent that we agree on a lot of issues relative to management. There's support for prescribed burning, there's support for invasives management, deer, et cetera. I think the difference between the two pie charts in terms of removing wood and cutting anything was specifically related to the fact that when you talk about ecological health, there isn't general support for that definition. For example, there was a lot of defense yesterday of cutting 100-year-old trees for successional forest, or thinning to manage wildfire, when we know that in fact, that statistically makes them worse. And I think we've got to get to some definition that's clear there, because there's a lot of stuff we do agree upon in terms of what we don't want to happen in our public forests. And I think we just have to get away from this giant umbrella term of management that includes things that we don't agree upon. And I think we should just start with the pieces of that we do agree upon. And lastly, in response to Elliot's question, where do we make these decisions? I think New Jersey already made this decision. 50% of our forests are private land, 50% of our forests were protected. Most of us thought they were protected from logging for 50 years. And I think to start trying to map, trying to make decisions about where to do this and that, it's just a delaying tactic. We need to protect our public forests now. It's absolutely mandatory from the perspective of client. And not one word was brought up yesterday from the pro-cutting people about the needs that we face in terms of climate. It was only to diss the effectiveness of larger trees. So I think we really have to, we can agree on climate. That did seem to be a general scheme that we can agree upon.
So Leslie, just to follow up on that, because one of the things you said is one of the key points we have to resolve, right? Which is the folks who are have the perspective that we shouldn't remove any wood product, right? Versus the view that it could be done if it's purely tied to ecological purposes. What I'm hearing from like you and Ken is if we could have a better, clear definition of what we mean by for ecological health or ecological purposes, is that something that could help to move the people who are of the viewpoint right now that we don't want to talk about any removal into a position of being able to support removal under certain circumstances if we can more clearly define what those circumstances are?
I think you already saw a lot of support for limited removal. What you didn't see was support for sort of open to interpretation removal based on some ambiguous definition of ecological health.
So this may be one of the key issues we need to resolve. So as a follow-on to this meeting, how do we resolve that? Do we need a subgroup that's going to tackle this ecological health question? How would it be defined? Can we define it? Would it be left to a set of scientific experts that people would have confidence in to define? Like, to me, this seems like one of the big.
I'm in favor of a subgroup because I think we could, like a group of us at the Highlands Coalition have been preparing a list of these are the things we think you can do. These are the things we think you can't do. We could go down them one by one and really find out where we agree and where we don't agree. I think that's definitely an option. I also think, however, we need a subgroup relative to the white cedar. We spent an awful lot of time talking about that today. And in fact, I think we need to talk more to each other about that because I agree with a huge amount of what they're doing. I just don't agree with all of it.
So I think this is pretty key. I mean, fellow co-chairs here, I think, I'm actually really encouraged by, all the possible points of agreement that I heard people tick through today, but we've been held back from that, right? Because of this sort of lingering concern and debate over, under what circumstances might harvesting occur, right? And if it's for ecological purposes, and how do we define that in a way that people feel comfortable with that? If we can resolve that, then it might clear the way for agreement on a lot of other things based on what I'm hearing today.
We may not get total agreement, but we may get agreement on at least pieces of it. That would be a good starting point, I think.
Right. So, fellow co-chairs, what do you think about continuing this conversation about trying to get some clarity on what we mean by management for ecological objectives, how we define that in a way that people can feel comfortable with that as a next step on that particular issue?
I think that's a good idea, but not a subgroup, because the subgroup would be everybody. Everyone's interested in that. But I think that that's something that we could further define. That's what
We
this.
just have more meetings on it for the people who are interested in talking about.
Oops.
Because it's everybody, Leslie. I kind of agree with this. With Eileen, because it's everybody's going to join.
So let's talk on it further. I like the idea because we saw it in the survey results, right? We thought we needed to parse out that definition some more, but I think it needs to be the work group doing it, not just one small group, because everyone's going to want to be on it.
Right.
So, okay.
But our goal for this hour here was to figure out, do we think there's the potential to find some common ground? I personally am feeling like I think there is, based on what I've heard today, especially if we can figure out this ecological health definition of ecological health, how that gets determined.
Tom, I kind of want to read this list that I keep writing on of what I've heard from everybody right now, because I think there are really broad things that we can reach consensus on right now. For example, a public, transparent, and stakeholder input process from the DEP. I think everybody, to start with that, right?
We voted on a
Yes.
proposal.
Yeah, Jim Lyons had a proposal along those lines, which I think we already embraced, basically.
And the inventory and planning we did already as well.
I just think in the interest of time that we should reach consensus on something of what people have said already. What do you think? I think Andy also left already.
I'd like to assess everything. I was taking notes too, Angela. I'd like us to get together and look at our notes.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and also give people who aren't on the call today, there might have been some people yesterday that couldn't make it today. It's a big group. Give them an opportunity to weigh in. You know what I would like to do, is take our notes and synopsize them a bit and maybe send it out to everyone and
good idea.
What do you think?
I think if the co-chairs can try to digest what we've heard and come back to folks with a bit of a summary of what we think we might have consensus on, and where we need a little more work to, resolve some of those, outstanding issues as a next step. So maybe, and I just know it's 6 o'clock already, Anjali. So maybe that's the next step, right? Is that we can digest this and come back to the work groups with a bit of our summary of what we think we heard, and then we can test that, right? People can say, yeah, you got that right, and we, that does ring true, or it doesn't. But maybe rather than trying to do that instead of rush to do that right now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And we'll do that before jumping to a vote. We still might need to do a vote, but
yeah.
This would be a good.
John, Julia, Margaret, were there quick things that weren't on the list already that you want to add, real quick?
Yeah, 1 minute. Okay. We've had a lot of talk about carbon storage, but nobody has been talking about the 20-year cycle of methane. We will have rampant acceleration of global warming in the next 20 years due to the 20-year methane cycle. We just can't afford to add any other stressors on top of that by removing large invasive trees and replacing them with native cedars. By the time the cedars grow up, it will be too late. We need to keep all the mature trees that we have now and add cedars on cleared land where there are no trees. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Margaret. John, something quick we haven't heard?
Yes, as you know, I'm the rule nerd.
in this group. And I just want to remind everyone that every time the state of New Jersey acquires a piece of property, there are reasons given why it was acquired and what it was acquired for. So I just don't want everyone to lose track of the fact that there are documents for every single piece of property in the state of New Jersey that must give us some idea as to what the government intended when they acquired the property. And here we are talking about making up rules with what you can do with the property. I think you have to write rules that say whatever we do is consistent with the reasons the property was acquired in the first place. And that's pretty important for publicly owned properties. And we haven't mentioned it once.
This is the Title 13 analysis you're talking about?
Well, I have looked at the Title 13 and I'm working on that, but this is separate and apart from that. There's a contract with the DEP with, where they say whereas and whereas and whereas, we're acquiring this property for the following purposes. And I think there has to be a rule in whatever we do on any publicly owned property that it has to be consistent with the reasons for which that property was acquired, period. And if it doesn't happen to include commercial logging, which I doubt that it does, then the answers are no. If it mentions something about ecological health, maybe they have a definition for that, or maybe they don't.
Okay. Thank you, John. Julia?
Just to add, we do have that list that we're happy to share that might be helpful to guide discussion that Leslie referred to. So we can send it to the task force leaders and you can see if you think it would be helpful.
Please do. Okay. We're going to give Sandra the last comment because we've already heard quite a bit from Leslie and Emil, and then we got to wrap up with a little bit about the voting process. So, Sandra.
Yes, we've talked today and we've talked frequently about the need for science, but even today in the discussion, it's clear that there's these scientific studies and that scientific studies. There are going to be differences when you come to management decisions. What we need is some kind of process. We've talked about process for public comment, but we haven't talked about process for resolving differences as to how land management will be carried out. So I suggest we think about that process as well.
Process for resolving differences. Okay, thank you. All right, well, I want to thank everybody. I have to say I'm feeling heartened by the last hour of conversation, and it's kind of nice to get into a different space in your mind where you're actually looking for things that we actually agree on rather than, sort of things that we don't agree on. So it was refreshing. I hope everybody feels that way as well. I think now I'm going to turn it back to Eileen, who's going to just clarify a little bit further kind of where we are on the issue of if there are issues that we need to actually kind of take to a vote, how's that gonna work?
Right. Again, last resort is voting, but we want to be prepared to have a fair process in place if and when it needs to be done. So we've been talking about this for a couple of months, and you know that we've been we've been meeting a lot and talking a lot about this and hearing feedback. So what's not new, I'm sorry, did somebody talk? What's not new is that we do have a process for organizations and how to weight them. The only part we haven't shared till to date is how those organizations will be weighted. So yesterday and today, we are sharing that with everyone. So to distinguish first about what is an organization versus a private like vote, a private individual who is representing just themselves. So we'll just say I'm a homeowner, I'm not associate, I'm not a board member, I'm not a staff person, and I'm not a decision maker at an organization. I'm here representing myself. You have a vote. Of course, your vote is a one vote, one person, one vote. We also put any for-profit organizations as a one as well. That's how we were handling for-profits. Organizations, we've asked any organizations that wanted their group to be officially represented to send us a letter indicating who their authorized representative is. Some of these organizations are shade tree commissions, environmental commissions, and some are regional organizations. Some are statewide conservation groups. They vary, but it was up to the organization to determine if they wanted to be represented as an organization. And then we just asked them to please designate one person to be your voting designee. So for instance, if there are 5 people from one organization participating, only one of them will be designated to vote, and that vote will be weighted. So the way it's going to be voted, I'll start with government, because we do have some government entities, county parks, county recreations, municipalities. A small government entity like a local group would be counted as 2. Any kind of weighting scheme we come up with is arbitrary. So we said, well, what can be arbitrary and fair? So what we decided on was doubling. So an individual has a vote of 1. We thought a small municipality will have a vote of 2. That's double. Similarly, a county or a region will have a vote of 4. We just doubled 2 to make it 4. And then statewide government entities, and I don't think we have any, but if we did, they would be 8 as large state government entities. For non-government entities, very similar. The small-sized organizations, and we define small as less than 100, having 2. So again, it's just a doubling. Private individual is 1, a small organization is 2. A medium-sized organization, which is defined as more than 100, but under 1,000, would have 4, a doubling from the 2. And then large-sized organizations, which we defined as larger than 1,000, would have a vote weight of 8. So again, 1, 2, 4, and 8. There are all manner of schemes that we could have come up with and that we did discuss. We looked at how other groups do it. We've talked a lot, as you know, we've been talking about this for months, but this, we all compromised and agreed on this scheme. So if there is a vote to be had, this is how the voting would happen. So yesterday, some people had some questions. Some clarity. If you have a question on the logistics, I ask you not to comment on whether you like it or not, because we're going to stick with this, but I will let you know, we did have fighting amongst ourselves. Chances are, if there's something you didn't like, one of us didn't like it either. This is what we could live with. This was our compromise. This was our consensus way to do it. So if there's clarifying questions, we will go ahead and take.
Eileen, could I just add one thing, which is when the numbers you threw out there in terms of like less than 100, less than 1,000, over 1,000, we're talking about members, right? So that's, those are numbers we're talking about. Like somebody might have whatever, 1,000 people on your Facebook page, but that's not a member. So we're talking about, members that, and a member is typically someone that makes some financial contribution to your organization. No matter how small it is, that's a member, right? So.
But if you're a member of an organization, I used this example yesterday, I liked it, so I'm going to use it again. My mother is just a member of New Jersey Audubon. She sends in her annual check. If she were on this task force, she would still have her own, she would be representing herself. Just because you're a member of a group doesn't mean you're represented by a vote here. The voting members are staff, board members, directors, or decision-making entities within the organization. So just because you're a member doesn't mean you're represented by that organization. You have your own vote. Okay, Leslie?
Yeah, my question is, we have a proposal deadline. Are all the proposals visible now? Because some of us don't know whether we want to make another one based on what ones we haven't seen yet. Or are they all on the task force webpage where you have the extra proposals?
Yeah, the new ones, I haven't been tracking this, but the new ones we haven't reviewed yet to be released. We're waiting for the due date just for time constraints. Not every proposal is going to be viewed by every person. Some were rejected. for various reasons. But the ones that were, I think Ally prepared a list of all the proposals that were currently discussed. And then there was a list of proposals that pertain to a particular topic. So the short answer is no, they're not all up there. But the ones that are going to be discussed will
we
be.
maybe extend the deadline for proposals just because we don't know if something we want to propose is there or not.
Tom, Anjali,
The deadline, wasn't it the end of the month?
31st, the end
The
of the.
deadline was
Oh.
originally the 31st. So
I mean, I'm okay with extending it
It doesn't have to be long, but I think we
one
need
more
to
week,
know-
2 more weeks, like it's.
I think we need titles posted so we can see whether we think something's
Oh,
missing.
September.
That's really the it for me.
How about September? Well, some people had some scheduling issues too and have requested an extension. How about September 9
Fine by me.
and titles of proposals available, maybe.
September
Okay,
9th was at the end of next week. Yeah.
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 An extra week, an extra week.
And I totally agree that anyone who wants to participate in ecological health, that's the kind of subgroup I mean, anyone who wants to be on it. But I hope you will move forward on that because I think so much hinges on it.
Mhm. Okay,
Great. Thank you. Okay.
all right. What am I doing here? We have Nicholas.
Yeah. All right, you can hear me?
Yes.
All right, the one thing that puzzles me is we all agreed to be in communication and transparent with each other, but our votes apparently are going to be anonymous. Why can't we display exactly who we are when we
Yeah,
vote?
voting is anonymous. This is a group of just regular people. This is not a government entity where you might expect something like that. And we're protecting people's privacy. We don't want anyone to be harassed or otherwise communicated with over their vote. So we're protecting their anonymity. All of you have that same protections.
All right, but in a political vote, we would be anonymous. This
Well,
is
in a
not
political vote, it's
political,
anonymous.
so we should
It is
be.
anonymous. Okay. Doris?
Hi, I'm wondering if the 2 pie charts we saw earlier today were weighted according to the size of the group, and how the pie charts would look different if they were weighted.
They are not weighted because it was just for informational purposes. So we didn't want to get into that. We hope we don't have to get into that, but we might. But no, those were not weighted. That was whoever participated. There was 127 respondents, all treated exactly the same because the purpose was really just to get a feel for the room. That was it. If it were a formal vote, it would be done differently and it would be weighted.
Thank you.
Julia.
I think I just want to make sure that I understood your clarification, Eileen, correctly. When you were talking about statewide groups, you said you didn't think there were any. So for instance, I know you said that DEP will not be voting, but I wondered if that also meant that the Division of Fish and Wildlife is not voting.
Well, Division of Fish and Wildlife is part of DEP.
Well, I know, but sometimes they sort of think they aren't. So
no. Any DEP entity wouldn't, but say, I don't know, say BPU were a member, I guess that they could vote. They're not, that's why I use them. I'm not aware of any government statewide entity that's on the task force right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So maybe we can wrap at this point, wrap it up so people can get on to their evenings and their dinner and their families and whatever else we have going on in our lives. I just want to thank everyone. I know a lot of people spent yesterday and today with us. It's a lot of hours and, it's not always easy. It's nice that we kind of maybe could end on a little more positive note today than some of the earlier discussions. So that's hopeful, but I just really want to thank everyone for taking so much time to be a part of this. It's really hard and it is a lot of time. And we really appreciate and value everyone being a part of this process.
All righty.
Thank you, everybody.
To be continued.